Good morning, dear students. How are you? Today we are going to begin our novel for this year. It's called A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. A tale means a story. The two cities we are going to deal with them are London and Paris. We are going to talk about the conditions in these two cities, or the two great countries, England and its capital London, France and its capital Paris. This story is written by Charles Dickens. He is an English writer, great English writer. He had written a lot of books. A Tale of Two Cities is a historical novel. Its events are real, but he had imagined, or he told us, the condition in the two countries through this story. But it is talking about a historical event which had happened, which is the French Revolution. It's a historical novel written by Charles Dickens, who painted a picture of life in England and France. It was the age of contradictions in everything, and the conditions were unstable. It was the age of contradictions. Contradictions, what do you mean by the word contradictions? The opposite of everything. You can find the opposite of everything. Very rich people, very poor. Very happy people and very sad. Everything was and its opposite. And the conditions were unstable. The two countries were in very bad conditions. The events were set in two capitals, London and Paris, before and during the French Revolution. He is showing you how the French Revolution began, and the economic and political conditions which led to the revolution. The novel tells the story of the French doctor Alexander Manet. From the character from this character, Dr. Alexander Manet, we are going to see how this person suffered a lot from the rich and aristocratic, and how he had been sent to prison, and what happened to him, and how the poor people are going to prepare for the revolution. The novel tells the story of the French doctor Alexander Manet and his 18-year-long imprisonment in the Bastille prison. This is a very famous prison in Paris. And his release to live in London. He had been set free after 18 years of being in prison, with his daughter Lucy, whom he had never met. He had never met his daughter. She had been her mother gave her birth while he was in prison, and she had lived her life thinking that her father is dead. She is going to realize that he is still alive, and she will see him the first time in a very bad condition. He suffered a lot because of a nobleman who sent him to prison by a lettre de cachet. A lettre de cachet is a letter the rich and aristocrats used to write if they feel annoyed or sad or angry from anyone. They write his name in this letter, and he is immediately sent to prison without any trial or without any reason. Dr. Manet was one of many people who were oppressed and suffered because of the noblemen and the laws in this time. The characters we are going to meet in our novel are Charles Darnay, he is our main character, Sidney Carton, another important character, Lucy Manet, Dr. Manet, Ernest Devarge and Madame Devarge, Ernest Devarge and his wife, Madame Devarge. They are going to be the leaders of the revolution and the people who are preparing the revolution and telling the others what to do. Mr. Lorry, he is a friend to Dr. Manet, and he had taken care of Lucy all the time while her father was in prison. Miss Pross is a very kind lady. she had grown Lucy up and she was taking care of her all the time. The Marquis of Evermond, he is the uncle of Charles Darnay, John Parsad, Gaspard the Rude Mender. Now we are going to summarize the event of chapter 1, 2 and 3, and after we have finished, you have to read all the chapters from your book in details. It was the age of contradictions in both countries, England and France. It was the age of extremes. Extremes, different things. The rich were very rich and the poor were very poor. The rich people were very rich, enjoying their life, and the poor people were very poor, suffering all the time. In France, the conditions were very bad. The king and the noblemen were more concerned with their pleasures and wealth and worry about the poor. They never care about the poor, hungry class who had begun to prepare themselves to revolute as they were oppressed by their laws. They were suffering from them. They never gave them any care, only made them servants, oppressing them, taking them from them a lot of money as taxes. In England, there was much crime. The passengers who were traveling out of London on late night in November, feared for their safety when they heard the sound of a horse coming from behind the coach. The passengers felt very afraid when they were traveling because they might find a lot of people came out and steal them because they need money. So they were very afraid while they were traveling, taking care that no one come near them. Death seemed to be the easiest way to deal with problems. All the people find killing is the easiest way. They were killing anyone just to get money to eat. They don't need the money for anything to enjoy themselves. No, they need the money to eat. They can't find any money to eat. One night, the London-Dover Mail coach is a coach people used to travel from London to Dover. They were going from London to Dover. Was going uphill with the passengers walking beside it because of the mud. It was dark, cold and foggy. They were afraid of being attacked. They were very afraid of being attacked by anyone. A rider came near the coach. A person came near the coach. He had a message to one of the passengers inside the coach. The rider wanted to speak to Mr. Lorry, was traveling from London to Dover. This person is coming to him with a message. The rider wanted to speak to Mr. Lorry, one of the passengers heading for Dover. He had a message for him from Tellson's Bank in London. The message said, Mr. Lorry made this person read the message loudly so no one of the other passengers felt annoyed or afraid. The message said, wait for Mademoiselle at Dover. He is told to wait for Mademoiselle. The person he is going to wait for her is Lucy Manott. And he answered with another message which said recalled to life, means return back to life. And he means by this Dr. Manott that he returned back to life after being imprisoned for 18 years. Mr. Lorry had a dream. Now Mr. Lorry had reached Dover and he had a dream of the man whom he got out after being imprisoned for 18 years. Mr. Lorry arrived at Dover and arranged for 2 rooms, one for himself and another for a young lady whom would arrive. The young lady, as we said, is Lucy Manott. Mr. Lorry was a gentleman of 60 and Lucy Manette was a young lady of about 17 years old. She was very pretty. Lucy went to Dover because she had received a letter from Tellson's bank. Lucy went to Dover, Tellson's bank, the bank Mr. Lorry was working in, and the bank, her father has property in it. They were taking care of her. He sent her a letter telling her to go to France to take some property of her father, but she was very afraid to travel alone because the conditions, as we have said, were very bad. So she asked Mr. Lorry to wait for her at Dover to travel with him. Lucy went to Dover because she had received a letter from Tellson's bank, said that there was some property that her father, whom he had never met, she had never met her father, had left to her, and she had to go to Paris to meet a gentleman from the bank. This man is Mr. Lorry. Lucy replied to the bank that she wanted to travel under the protection of that man. That's why they met at Dover to travel together. They are going to travel together to Paris to get her father back to England. Mr. Lorry told Lucy the story of a French customer. Before they will travel to Paris, Mr. Lorry wanted to tell her that she is going to see her father. He began his talking with her by telling her a story about a person or a customer of the bank. He didn't say to her that this is the story of her father, but from what he is going to say, she had understood that he is talking about her father. Mr. Lorry told Lucy the story of a French customer of the bank whom he did for him his business. He was a doctor who married an English woman. One day the doctor disappeared and they thought he might be sent to prison by a lettre de cachet. Then the mother died when the girl was 2 years old and he brought her to England. Mr. Lorry brought the girl from Paris to England to live there, and he had brought for her Miss Pross to take care of her. He kept her with Miss Pross, who had taken care of Lucy since her childhood until now. Lucy realized that this was the story of her father, and Mr. Lorry told her that her father was still alive, but he is in a very bad condition. But he had changed a lot after spending 18 years in the Bastille prison. He was freed and taken to the house of an old servant in Paris, and they would go, Mr. Lorry, to get him back. Her father was in a very bad condition. He had lost his memory from the long time he had spent in prison. Mr. Lorry is going with her to identify her father. She didn't see him before. She won't be able to know him. So Mr. Lorry will identify him. Where he is staying in Paris after he had been set free, he is staying in an old servant house who is Monsieur Devarge. Mr. Lorry to identify him and Lucy to comfort and restore him to life by her kindness and care. Mr. Lorry was sure that because of his daughter, kindness and care and love, Dr. Manette will return back to his good condition. Then they are going to travel. The scene for us has changed. Now we are in Paris. We have left Dover. We are in Paris and in Saint-Antoine, a very poor part in Paris, where Monsieur Devarge is living there, and he had Dr. Manette in his house. The scene changed to the suburb of Saint-Antoine in Paris. It was a poor part filled with hunger, misery, and sick people who filled with hatred towards the rich and the noblemen. All the people who were living in this part were very poor, suffering a lot, and they were full of hatred towards the aristocrats and noblemen. Later on, Saint-Antoine would be the center of the French Revolution. One day, a large cask of wine was fallen and broken in the street. All the people tried to get some of the wine. When this cask of wine had fallen on the street, they tried to get any drop of wine by any way. This shows you how they were suffering. They were taking the wine from the ground. It might full of mud, and they drink it. It was a good chance for them to drink wine. The wine was red, and the wine was red and had stained the street. It looked like blood. The color of the wine was red. It had stained the ground. It had stained the street, changed the color of the street into red, and it's simple to what is going to happen later on. When the revolution began, all the streets are going to have the red color because of blood and because of killing. This is a picture for the people when the cask of wine had fallen and they were trying to get any drop of wine. There was a wine shop on the corner. In the same place, there was a wine shop in the corner. Monsieur Devarge was the owner and Madame Devarge was his wife. She was knitting in the shop all the time. She was knitting on the shop all the time. This action she was doing as if she was recording everything by this knitting, as if she was recording everything. Monsieur Devarge introduced to his wife 3 men, all of them called Jacks. All the people, all the men who were helping Monsieur Devarge to prepare for the revolution, he gave them the same name, Jacks. So no one will be able to know who are they. Mr. Laurie and Lucy were sitting in a corner in the shop. Then Monsieur Devarge took them to see Dr. Manette. He had locked him in a room as he had been locked for a long time. Mr. Laurie and Lucy had reached the wine shop of Monsieur Devarge to take Dr. Manette back. And when Monsieur Devarge took them to see the doctor, Mr. Laurie had found that Monsieur Devarge had kept him and he had locked the door. He explained to him that Dr. Manette had lived 18 years. The door had been locked. He can't leave him without locking the door. They also had seen the 3 Jacks looking into the room of Dr. Manette through some cracks in the wall. Are you making a show of Dr. Manette? He had kept those men to look at him. He is showing them what the rich people and the aristocrats had done to this man. Monsieur Devarge apologized and opened the door. They found a white-haired man sitting on a bench making shoes. He couldn't remember any one of them. Dr. Manette, after the 18 years of imprisonment, had been in a very bad condition. He had lost his memory. He can't remember anything. He was all the time making shoes. He said to Monsieur Devarge, "My name is 105 North Tower." He can't even remember his own name. He gets used to be called by the number of his cell. So anyone is asked him about his name, his answer was, "My name is 105 105 North Tower. This is the number of his cell and his name for 18 years in prison. This was the number of his cell in the Bastille prison. He had been called by this name for 18 years. Lucy sat down and looked after her father. He felt very comfort with her. He liked her very much. She was so kind towards him. She treated him in a very good way, and he felt comfort to her. Now they are preparing themselves to return back to England, to live in London, to take him away from this place who he had suffered in it a lot. This is a picture for Dr. Manette sitting, making shoes in the prison. By this we have finished the first 3 chapters. Please read the chapters in details from your own book and revise our summary once more. Goodbye.